What's up, everybody? Well, I'm making a video that I might want to postpone until the 4th of July, since I may not have any July videos once again this year. And I really need to get started on, preparing to be where I'm going to be. And what I want to title this video, Freedom of Dissociation. And what I mean by that is the one thing I hate the most about school, in looking back, and a lot of times it's like you don't really know how bad you have it until you back away from it and you realize, yeah, that was terrible. At the time it was just the norm. At the time it was just life. But once you get out of school, you realize what you've lost. It was the right to freely associate with people you wanted to be with, but more importantly, to dissociate from people you didn't want to be with, like people you have nothing in common with. You know what I'm saying? Like, just being forced to sit in a classroom with people based solely on the fact that they live in your area. You know what I'm saying? Based solely on the fact that the school zones decided that, these people go to this school, those people go to that school, and so on. And I feel like I hated that about school. And I know that it's designed more than anything to wear you down. It's designed to make you not care, if you have to be locked in a building with, a certain rotating group of people, that changes over time, but that you can't escape being around, for the time being. It's to kind of wear down your inhibitions that you would otherwise have, so that when you go work at a job, it's all about a job. It's about creating workers. And you go to school and it prepares you for the job where you won't get to decide who your coworkers are, who your boss is, and so on. And that is one thing that I did not even realize was so awful about school, was the fact that you had to be around people, and you had no choice. And I hated the way they would make group work. And they even came out and said that they were getting orders from the top down to force group work on kids so that they would be prepared for the office world, the business world, wherein they would have to do group projects, where it wouldn't just be your skills, your abilities. It would be your ability to work with a group of people on a project and come up with something good. And, your success or failure would be partly contingent on what other people did or didn't do. And, I just hated that. I hated not having freedom of association, but more importantly, dissociation. More importantly, I don't think it's fair. I really do not think it's fair that, that school teaches you that your age is the most important thing about you. That's the other thing I hate about school. It teaches you that being X years old right now is the most important thing about you, and that you have more in common with someone with a you-know-what who is supposedly or theoretically your age, they're in your grade level, than another female who is maybe 5 years older than you or younger than you. Well, in the case of my little sister, 9 years younger than me. And, it's like saying that I have, I was talking about my cousin who is 14 months my junior, but was put in the class of 2002, because his mom couldn't wait for him to go to school. And, being the working mom that she was. But, so it's like saying that I have more in common with my cousin, who has a you-know-what, but was put in the class of 2002. Obviously we didn't go to the same school because we didn't live in the same state or town, but that I have more in common with people like him than with people like my little sister, 9 years my junior, or people like one of my other cousins, a female cousin, 9 years my senior. So it's like I'm right smack dab in the middle of her and my little sister. So my sister was born, I was 9 and she was 18. And so it's like saying that I have more in common with, people like my male cousin than, with people like her and my little sister, or, another female cousin that was 5 years younger than me, or another female cousin who was even older than her, or my aunts and my mom. You know what I'm saying? Because I consider the gender difference to be the single most important thing about a person. And I don't think it's fair. I do not think it's fair that they can just force kids to go to school, especially girls, to go to a school that was, that's half boys, or technically it starts out slightly more than half boys, because slightly more boys than girls are born in every country of the world. But by the time you reach old age, it's more females, because after age 30, the males die younger than the females. And so, you're in this classroom where about 51% of the kids, what we'll just call it roughly half, are boys. And, it's not fair. That's especially not fair to girls, because it's like, that we have to be locked in a room where half of the people are potential impregnators. You know what I'm saying? As an impregnable person, with a womb, if they, forced you into a bathroom, they could do something that would cause you to get pregnant, in high school. And I really do not, and nowadays with this stupid gender thing of allowing kids to decide which bathroom they want to use, I do not think that's fair. It's especially not fair to girls, and then to turn around and blame us, for our slightly earlier maturation and earlier peaking, we mature younger and we peak sooner. Um, they blame us for boys' lack of performance, especially at the lower grades, but it continues throughout high school. Um, Somehow that's our fault, when the system was never really designed for us or even for boys. It was designed to produce workers. And, the fact that girls do better in it, at an earlier age, just because we mature younger, is not our fault. And it really, I don't think that's fair. Like, we never asked to be put in a room full of boys. Um, you know, and that's what I'm saying. It's like you don't have the freedom of dissociation, which to me is more important than the freedom of association. I feel like the best thing that my parents could have done was homeschool me, if they really loved me. And, I'm always obsessed with the freaking colds, but, um, I mean, we knew early on that the colds, my mom could deny this all she wants, you know, she just makes me so mad. She's one of these people that thinks that if you just don't count it as a cold, you just mentally pretend to forget about it, which I don't know how you can. Then it's like not having had a cold. Um, but, the few colds that I remember from what I call my early childhood, my first 6 years before I set foot in school, were the times when my mom let her guard down and forced me to be around kids, especially boys in the neighborhood that went to daycare and other things. And, we would be cold free all summer, both my sister and I, every single year. Like, I don't know that we ever just randomly caught a cold in the summer, unless my dad brought home that one from work in 96 before my 7th grade year. About like less than a year before this unforgettable one in May of 97. But, we're never sick in the summer. We were never sick in the summer. But then we'd go to school, and because we didn't have freedom of dissociation, it would always be some little Boy Scout or ball player, some little league kid, because it always seemed to be a boy, that would already have a cold on the first day of school. You know what I'm saying? Like, because they play in these large groups of kids, because they do more activities like, scouting and sports and, just large group activities. They're more likely to do things like that than the girls. Now, obviously, I mean, there's Girl Scouts and there's, girls' sports, but for obvious reasons, we're just not as inclined to do those things and to stick with them as long as the boys do. You know what I'm saying? A little girl might start out, in the Girl Scouts or the Brownies or whatever it is, or they might start out in softball and volleyball and, the female equivalents of boys sports, but we just hate the bugs so much out there. We hate the heat, we hate the bugs, we hate sweating, we hate getting dirty, and we just hate it so much that, even if we start out in it, even if we have parents willing to introduce us to those things, or, if they have brothers that do those things and cause the parents to want that for their daughters as well, guess what? They're more likely to quit. They're more likely to quit those activities and to stop seeing, those large groups of friends that would expose you to colds 365 and a quarter days a year. Yes, February 29th is important. But, the boys stick with those things and they continue those activities all throughout high school, maybe into college, in the form of frats or fraternities. Sure, there's sororities, but probably not as many girls are in them. So, it's just so unfair that you don't have freedom of dissociation, more importantly, than freedom of association, because I'd rather have the latter. Like, I'd rather, it's just so not fair that they can force you to be around people that you do not have anything in common with. So freedom isn't free, and I just wish that I had been homeschooled. Well, in a way I don't. In a way I'm glad I have the antibodies that you get, from having an average of at least 5 colds a year. And then in college, the typical 2 to 4 that they say is normal for adults. Mainly because I had a little sister at home, and then from 24 onward, it was never more than 1 in a year's time. So I guess the silver lining is that, the proof that these were colds and not allergies, as my mom wants to call them, is in the very fact that they're not still happening to this day. You know what I'm saying? If they were allergies, I would still be getting them to this day, as I've stated before. But no, they were colds. They were viruses. And I would hate to have kids because I'd be expected to do that very same thing with them, just to make them another worker, another cog in the wheel, and, send them to school. And, that's why I hate this term preschooler, because it's like legitimizing preschool with a word. It's like, wanting to condition people to think of school as something that can begin as young as 3 years old, and now a ridiculous 2.5 years old. If the mom is willing to go down to the school and change them every time they crap their pants, if they're not potty trained. It's ridiculous, calling them a preschooler to legitimize the idea that they should be or could be in some type of schooling long before the age of 6, which is ridiculous. And, this term preteen, normalizing the idea that, puberty makes a difference in what they are. They're no longer a child, because they could be hitting puberty, although many don't. No, they're not a preteen, they're a child. They're not a preschooler, they're a young child. And I hate, these subdivisions of childhood. And I really wish I could just forget about it and enjoy my freaking 43-year-old life. And go ahead and post this video.